wind up this discussion at 11:30, so we're going to have to move around. Jump to your discussion of McCormick Williamson Tract, a North Delta potential activity. Tell us what it was and what you think it might be. This is an answer to Gloria's question of what can we do now that helps. I think it might be useful to talk about that specifically.
Right. So this is a demonstration. So we've been getting pushed, as we're getting pushed here today, to be more applicable faster. And so we've done something for McCormick Williamson even before we finish this report.
Right.
Try to help that. And so this is that area, as you probably know. In the
don't assume it. And also, people are watching as this is being simulcast.
Yeah,
so why don't you explain physical location, the land ownership, and so on and so forth.
Right. So this is a parcel here in the sort of north, but also on the edge of the Central Delta. Let me see if I have a bigger map here that can show you where it is. Maybe I'll use this one. So again, this spot here, it's a fairly small little area, but it's been recognized for a long time as being kind of in the sweet spot of potential restoration area because it's not too subsided. It's not as subsided as other areas. It's also connected to the Cosumnes River.
An existing preserve and a river system.
Preserve. Right, and so the Nature Conservancy has acquired it, DWR has been involved in funding, and many other agencies have all been involved. And there's been a lot of ideas about how to design that, but it hasn't moved forward yet, and there was a lot of interest in looking at our work and figuring out what did that tell us about what to do there. So here's the spot. Walnut Grove is right here, so this is the Sacramento River, and the Cosumnes area is right up here. Interesting thing.
By the way, we can't see your pointer on the television set in front of us, so we just take your word for it that the folks watching this at their computer can.
Go like this.
I know. Allison seemed to figure out your left and right, but I can't get that through my head. I tried. Those two areas, interestingly,
those are the circles are around
circles
what
I just put on. The one on.
Nearest Walnut Grove?
Nearest Walnut Grove
That's the Meadows,
a
right?
remnant is Delta Meadows. So that was recognized as a remnant, but now we can see what piece of the delta that was, and we can see that's an important remnant. The one on the other side is a former lake that I don't think had been recognized before. We can see, oh, that's an interesting piece of the historical delta.
And that connects to?
Is not connecting to anything really now.
No.
It's
the lake is just a potential.
It's an isolated little piece that holds water. It's not performing the functions it used to. But again, that suggests some potential right there, right? So then we can step back and we can look at it in the context of our historical delta map. And you see where it fits into that three-landscape template.
Can you put that same box on that previous slide?
I guess I don't have the box, but it would be about like this. Right, so we're zooming way in.
And where's the Cosumnes Preserve and the Cosumnes River on this?
Do you see the Galt label, and you see the green area kind of in between? Yeah, that's, you see the green area to the right is the Cosumnes area, the riparian forest and all of that. And you can see a few labels there, Walnut Grove. And again, it's that parcel kind of right there in the center. And what we're able to do is overlay the historical map right on top of that. And between the map and all the other stuff we know, we can start to see that this was right on the edge between the North Delta and Central Delta. So it has some characteristic of both. It has the tidal channels that Allison talked about in the Central. It also is a little bit of the bottom of this whole flood basin. I wish I could point to your screen. But if you see the lakes up to the north, the blue areas, those are part of the Sacramento flood basin. So the Sacramento flood basin was coming down and intersecting with the Central Delta right in this area. And there's kind of a narrow point right there where the tract is, if you see, because the brown areas, the Sacramento River meanders fairly close to the brown area coming along the McCelumney River. Okay, great, you're looking at that map. So this area comes fairly close to this area. It's sort of a pinch point. And so it's making this be even more of a basin, capturing floodwaters. And so here we're kind of diagramming that out, isolating those features. So you have the natural levee of the Sacramento River. That's what the towns are all on, right? Including Walnut Grove. And you have the fan that is the Consumnes-McKellamny imprint, sediment imprint. And then you have this sort of narrow area and a flood basin coming down. All of this draining into McCormick Williamson, which makes it a really complex spot for flooding, right? And that's why this project has been driven as well, is because of the flood challenges. And interestingly, when we talk to folks there, local landowners, they know that that's a pinch point and that there's a flood, essentially a flood basin up above them. And that's understanding that is probably part of the solution to this tract. So then we can put McCormick Williamson in there, and you can see it not just as a parcel of land to have something done to it, but as a connecting piece between these processes coming from the river and the tidal processes, and then also the flood basin. You realize it's really an important spot that kind of needs to do a lot of different work as a part of the system. And of course, then the challenge is that that's one little piece of property. It's a big piece, for us.
4,000 acres or something?
I think it's only 1,200.
Is it 12?
1,200 acres?
No, I think it's bigger.
I think it's 1,200 acres.
Tom, do you know?
12, I hear 14.
So, but inevitably, whatever it is, and this happens everywhere you are only dealing with a parcel at a time, generally. So what we're able to suggest here, going through this, is you can look at the natural landscape patterns and think about what would this parcel be, but then also what would the other pieces need to be if you're going to actually make this work. It's really interesting to look at it. This is the contemporary topography. This is what your chairman, I think, has been wanting us to get to. You can actually see in the contemporary LiDAR all of the things we've talked about here. You can see the natural levee. That's this higher ground in red and orange along the river. You can see that along, the channel, the tidal channel, there was not any higher ground because it's just a tidal channel. And you can see the lower area. This is essentially the bottom of a flood basin. And so the higher land is still there. You wouldn't notice it when you drive around out there. It just seems flat, but it is a little bit higher. And that's where the roads are. That's where the settlements are. That's where you do see some trees. So that becomes a really neat resource opportunity potentially. That would probably have the potential. You'd have to model it. You'd have to see about the sediment and the flood flows and think about climate change. But that suggests the potential for restoring riparian forest there, right? The physical feature that would allow riparian forest to occur there is still intact. So and then you also start to see the connectivity to the Consumnes area. Now the challenge is that there are levees all around. And so there's the levee. Let me just point out also, you see all of these other points of land sticking out in the red and orange. Those are other former courses of the river, the McKellamny River, that it's taken at different points over the past few thousand years. Those are, of course, still high grounds today, and there are still lakes or low areas in between each of those. Some of them you can actually see in aerials today. So these are still low areas. They generally are not as good for farming. Sometimes farmers actually, sort of off the record, might say, this part of my property, not as useful. It's pretty wet, maybe asparagus some years. So there's these different areas. It's not all one parcel. So trying to get beyond seeing these systems that way. So then you can see here the former lakes overlaid, and you can see their remnant shapes. They're still in the topography today. There's one in the red dot. So what we came up with was a fairly simple diagram suggesting how, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold.
And all these diagrams refer to McCormick Williamson.
This is McCormick Williamson.
It's kind of a configuration over time.
Yeah, so this is a way of thinking about McCormick Williamson in its larger context. So McCormick Williamson, I didn't draw it on exactly, is really a smaller piece of the larger McKellamny River Delta, if you will. It's also a piece of the bottom of the former Sacramento River Basin. And so the challenge then is to design McCormick Williamson tract such that, they only own that piece right now, but you would like to design it such that it actually was connected to these other processes, at least over the long term. And this is the real challenge, I think, with restoration, and something we've talked about with the science program quite a bit, is how can you set up a system so that you do the parcels that you actually can acquire, and there's willing owners and they want to do this, and you still have to protect neighboring properties at the same time, but can you at least have a larger plan so that you know how the pieces are going to fit together over time as there's interest, availability, funds. So that's what this suggests, is that, so here's looking at just the parcel with the neighboring remnant pieces that we pointed out, that lake, Delta Meadows. Here's what we suggest would happen if you just restored the parcel. It would be a good project. It certainly would contribute. It's a really good step. But over time, it doesn't have the functions that we talked about that we see from the historical landscape. It doesn't have, for example, the ability to move upstream as sea level rises, right? Because it has barriers, levees. So in the long run, it may not persist as well as it could. It has the potential to be connected to those transitions, but the parcel is too limited. Also, it's not connected to the floodplain overflows, so it's not going to get the sediment. So an alternate scenario, if you will, and this is just thinking, these are just conceptual ideas, these are not, there's many steps to evaluate, would be to connect that parcel to other neighboring parcels to make a larger functional system. And so we can sort of paint out, drawing on the historical analysis, drawing on contemporary analysis, what those pieces of the puzzle would look like. So that's one way I put this sometimes, is that the historical and then the analysis of the contemporary would create that picture on the cover of the puzzle, that tells you what you're trying to aim for. You get these puzzle pieces, but we don't have the picture of the puzzle, right? We need to figure out what we do with the little pieces we have and make sure they actually add up to something. So this is a small